Welcome to a special series of episodes on the Docs with Disabilities podcast, dedicated to shedding light on the extraordinary careers of disability resource professionals, or DRPs. In this unique DRP series, we explore the multifaceted role of these individuals: part psychologist, educator, attorney, architect, clinical specialist, ombudsman, secretaries of state, and all-around MacGyvers. Originating from diverse backgrounds and experiences, these warriors of access collaborate with faculty, administrators, students, instructional designers, and diversity professionals to create inclusivity in health professions education. Join me as I embark on a journey to gain insights into the dynamic profession of DRPs, where no 2 days are alike and thinking outside the box is a necessary skill. In this limited series, I'll delve into the hearts and minds of those shaping the landscape of disability access. In today's episode, our spotlight is on mentorship. Our guests aren't just professionals in the field, they are the guiding forces who have shaped not only my career, but countless others through their invaluable guidance, unwavering support, and profound wisdom. Let's get started exploring the profound impact of mentorship in the world of disability resource professionals. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. We are exploring some pretty interesting topics during this 6-episode special series on disability resource professionals. But I have to tell you that this episode is the single most important to me. It's on mentorship. All of our guests today hold a special place in my heart, and I truly believe that if it were not for each of them, my career would not be what it is today. All of you welcomed me, lifted me, listened to me, taught me, corrected me, dare I say, tolerated me, any number of things. And if you hadn't done this, if you hadn't given so much of yourselves and given it so freely and added so much to the practice, so many people would not be in the position that they're in. Through your roles as mentors and sponsors, you have made an immeasurable impact on disability resource providers. And of course, that is the topic of the day: the critical role of mentorship and sponsorship in building the next generation of DRPs. So, why don't we get started by having you introduce yourselves? Jane?
I'm Jane Jarrow. I am the president of Disability Access Information and Support, which is a very fine title for my private consulting firm. I am the president. I'm also the bottle washer and the janitor, etc. But I have been giving technical assistance and doing classes, online classes, and campus visits going on 24 years as a private consultant. Prior to that, I spent 14 years as the executive director of AHEAD. My academic background is all in speech and hearing, bachelor's and master's from Purdue. My PhD is from Wichita State University. And I spent 7 years as a full-time faculty member at The Ohio State University before I came to the field of disability services.
Well, we're so lucky to have you. Jane Thierfeld Brown.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm still choked up a little from your introduction and listening to Jane. I'm Jane Thierfeld Brown. I've been in disability services for over 44 years at different universities. Most recently, I was at the University of Connecticut School of Law as the Director of Student Services, including Disability Services. I retired 7 years ago. Before I left there, I was at Yale Child Study at Yale Medical School, working with college students with autism. I've been doing work with college students in autism now for about 25 years, maybe a little bit more. Currently, I'm a director of College Autism Spectrum.
Paul, why don't you introduce yourself? My official title these days is Executive Council of a Head. And like Jane and actually, I guess everybody else here, I need to say I'm here in my private capacity. I think my most important accomplishment in life was to be a college flunk out. Um, and that was due to my disability, or at least one of my disabilities, which is pretty deep dyslexia. For over 40 years, I was the chief regional civil rights attorney for the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. I also taught law school for 22 years. And I believe that my office was really the leader in developing the foundational contours of post-secondary disability law. So to me, that's probably the most important contribution that I've made. I am a member of the California Bar, and I'm also a member of the Disability Rights Bar Association, which is a learning community, somewhat like AHEAD and its regional affiliates.
Michelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Rigler. I am the Executive Director of the Disability Resource Center at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I started the Mosaic program in 2004, which is probably my proudest accomplishment professionally. Very proud of that program. But also, I'm co-owner of Navigate U, which is a consulting firm. And we do a lot of external evaluation, SWOT analysis, gap analysis to help universities build capacity for them to be able to develop programs similar to Mosaic.
Awesome. And Jan, last but definitely not least.
Hi, I'm Jan Sarantino. I am currently retired from the University of California, Irvine, where I was a disability resource professional overseeing the disability office there. My career in disability services started off as a disability advocate for children in the foster care system. And then I was so interested in the field that I went back to school and got my special education credentials, and then started teaching in high school and left the K-12 system and went on to the University of California system. Now I am just working independently, helping students who are looking for assistance as they try to get accommodations on high stakes exams like the MCAT or USMLE, so that they can get into med school or pass the licensing exams. And during my retirement, I've also worked with some medical schools to improve their policies and procedures for students in the health sciences.
I am just so grateful to have been mentored by all of our guests today. I believe that disability resource professionals are among the kindest, most giving, most open people on earth, and I've always felt at home in this community. I began my work as a DRP in 2009 and kicked it off with a Jane Jarrow training, as I suspect many of our listeners did. Jane, I watch you and I'm just amazed. You are always so kind and supportive of new DRPs, and I know that you've mentored more than your fair share of people. What, after all of your training, do you think is the most critical element of mentorship?
In doing our introductions, we've all already hit on what is, to me, the key element in this field, and that is that disability services is the least territorial field I know, and people are always willing to share. Along with that, we are a community in a way that a lot of higher ed groups are not only in terms of our shared issues and concerns, but we don't have a lot of royalty within the field of disability services. There are people whose names are known by a whole lot of folks, but they're not known outside the disability services field. we're only important to each other because, in my case, I don't have any more expertise than anybody else. I've just been around longer than most of them. And I think as a result of that, my approach to folks is always, I'm more like you than I am different from you. I don't know any more about this. I've just seen much more because I've been here. And I encourage you to think of yourself as a fully functioning professional from day one, because we all came to this field knowing no more about it than you do now. And the other thing I always try and stress to people is however much you know about disability services, you know more than anybody else on your campus. And that's a standard theme with me, is to say, you already, by virtue of what you've asked in terms of the question, you know more about this than anybody else on your campus. And the fact that you are asking the question is exactly what you should be doing. So I think my approach has always been to remind people that there is no technique beyond the attitude. And if they're there and they're asking the questions and they're learning, they're doing exactly what they should be doing.
I know you're always very approachable, and I think you hit on something that I hadn't thought of before, which is we're all in this together. There is a feeling of community that is undeniable, and no one's territorial. That is key. Everyone has always been willing to give of themselves and of what they've learned. I absolutely love that. So I said I came into this profession in 2009. By 2010, I found my way to a head, and I was so excited. I was going to go to my first ahead, and I submitted something, as many of us do. And instead of getting that accepted, I was put on a panel. And I thought I was going to fall out, literally, when I saw the panel, because on that panel was Jane Thierfeld Brown. I had read all of her stuff. I'd kind of followed her from afar. It was love at first sight. Jane, you were so kind and you were so generous. You are so kind and so gracious and so generous. What motivates you to mentor others?
I don't really look at it necessarily as mentoring. I've never put a label on it. The way I look at it is a lot of really what Janie said. This is our field. The first person I met in this field was Joanne Simon, who most of you know. A week after I was given this job at the University of Rhode Island, and I said, gee, maybe there's somebody on this campus who does what I'm about to start doing at the University of Rhode Island. So I went to what they at that time called the Multiple Disabilities Office, and I met Joanne, who was the ultimate mentor. Come in, I'm going to introduce you to everyone. You need to join ahead today. Here's how to get in touch with Jane Jarrow. I mean, this.
Wow.
We are really dating ourselves, but this was way before email. This was 1979. You either had to write a letter or pick up the phone. And from that moment, I really learned how to act as a disability services provider, as Joanne was showing me, is that when someone comes and asks a question, you take the time and you help them through. We started this as such a small field of people. There were only a handful of us across the country doing disability work at colleges. And I met Janie and got introduced to a head, and soon after met Paul. And it was a different kind of learning then that we all shared, because we were sort of figuring out what all of this meant to college faculty, to college campuses. We were still building ramps to get into buildings. So I never really looked at it, Lisa, as mentoring. And do I see myself as a mentor? I've never really looked at it that way. I just felt like we're in education. Part of what we do is work with each other. That's why we stay in education, because we like that we're not in that kind of competitive field. We'd be doing something corporate and making real money, as opposed to what all of us stayed with all of our lives. This is what we all need to do for each other. I get discouraged when I see so many people asking questions anonymously because they're afraid to ask. that they'll be associated with their institution, or someone will know that they're asking for their institution. We work together as DRPs.
Wow, you brought up a couple of really good things. One, I think, is what Joanne Simon, and she came up in another podcast the other day, as the way that she came up in that podcast was in her sponsorship. So using her political capital, her relationships, her connections to connect others in just the service of the profession, like you're talking about now. So I think sponsorship is a major thing. And going back, I'm trying to think, Michelle, when we were writing that nomination letter, I think we talked a lot, Jane, about how you didn't just mentor us, you sponsored us. And that was critical to our careers, giving us opportunities to do presentations, giving us opportunities to write book chapters, really kind of opening the door and saying, join me, which was huge to us. But you also talk about something interesting, because I was noticing the same pattern where before people would be vulnerable in the community space or on the listserv and just kind of ask their question and know that the community would almost kind of circle around them and assist them with everything that they needed. And I still see people responding in that manner. And we want people to be able to have their anonymity, but somewhat sad that people probably feel like they, one, either don't want their institutions to know that they're posting these questions or want anonymity for some other legal or protective reason, or they are feeling uncomfortable with a knowledge gap, and they're feeling maybe all those feelings that we've all had, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to look silly, those sorts of things. So I love that you brought that up, because it's another thing I just want to say to all of you. I don't feel like I have to filter anything with any of you. I have always felt so much like I could be myself. I could come completely vulnerable and just ask you. That is such a gift as a mentor, as a friend, as a sponsor, to give to someone, because then you don't have to go through all the cognitive load of thinking about, how do I approach this? What do I say? What if I didn't use the right word? All those layers that are exhausting.
It's that imposter syndrome that just never goes away. Never goes away. But at the same time, I could call the Lisa Meeks and be like, "Hey, help me talk through this." Or, "Paul, I need to figure out this legal decision. Can you help me out?" And so quick to respond. Or, "Jane, I just need some support because I'm drowning right now." And it's okay, right? It's okay for us to not be perfect.
Michelle, staying with this little love triangle, I consider you one of my mentors, which might surprise you in using that word. I think this is interesting, right? Because I consider you one of my mentors, but you were coming up in the profession at the same time. So it's this concept of peer mentoring. We limit the idea of what a mentor is so often to someone that's ahead of you, or someone who has some sort of title or cachet in the profession, versus the person that you're working alongside, the person down the street at another university, or even the people who are coming up behind you. I love that you and I have had this amazing experience mentoring each other, and we got to lift each other up. At least that's how I feel. What are your thoughts? What do you think of someone below or beside you being a mentor?
Oh, I absolutely agree. You're one of my mentors as well. So I can distinctively remember a conversation I had with Jane looking for guidance, right? And me saying, "How do I get to where you are right now?" But the conversations are very different with you, Lisa. The conversations are very different with Paul. The conversations are very different with my peer mentors. I lean on Chester a lot. I lean on Jamie Axelrod a lot. I lean on a lot of my peers depending on different things. But it feels very different. Like, I remember being starstruck with Jane, but also fangirling over Paul. Like, can I talk to him? Can I say hi? Can I ask him a question? But at the same time, I have a person that works with me that I've worked with since she was an undergrad. And she is much younger than me. She reports to me, but she's a mentor to me in many situations, and that's Amy Rutherford. She is brilliant. She is so creative. She's so passionate. And so when my emotional battery is depleted, I just have to sit in a room with her for 10 minutes and I'm fine, right? So I think probably entering into a mentorship with somebody that is above you and gone before you is almost a little more scary. But
Mm.
entering into a mentorship relationship with peers or with people that report to you can sometimes be equally beneficial, obviously. But also, I feel like Jane was more of a sponsorship for me than a mentorship. It wasn't me turning into Jane, right? It was Jane lifting me up and making me who Michelle Rigler's supposed to be. Same
Mm.
with Paul. When I have questions, if I ask Paul questions, it's not Paul giving me legal guidance. It's him saying, let me guide you in thinking about this decision. And then you make your decision. I think that we can have mentors at any level. It doesn't matter who reports to who. It doesn't matter if it's a peer. It doesn't matter if it's somebody that came before you. I think you grab a mentor wherever you can find somebody, and it can look different for any person that you're in a mentoring relationship with.
Michelle, I really like that you mentioned about someone that reports to you. I think some of the really good experiences that I had before retiring was meeting weekly with the staff, all the disability professionals, and I would meet together each week and they would talk about either cases that they were working on that were interesting or that they had questions about. And it would just lift me up personally to see how they were approaching different situations, coming up with different ideas that even I would come up with. And it was inspiring in a way to see, hey, they're growing. They're growing by talking to one another. They're growing by working things out. They don't feel like somebody's going to look at them and say they don't know what they're doing. They're used to talking out situations. They don't feel like they have to have all the answers. And so because they didn't feel like they had to have all the answers, I didn't feel like I had to have all the answers. And we're never going to have all the answers anyway. So it's kind of nice to know, even if you're the one who's supposed to be in charge, that you don't have to even have all the answers, that you can go to your staff and get uplifted and get inspired and get energized by their creativity.
I think that a common theme is that we are all driven by some emotional commitment to mentorship. I was thinking about this question, why a commitment to mentorship? And being the oldest person on this call,
This was an argument for the listeners that weren't on,
yeah,
that couldn't see what was going on behind the scenes. Jane Jarrow, Paul Grossman having an argument about who's the oldest.
right. But I won.
Yes, you did.
Somewhere around age 72, I got a keen sense of being mortal. And as a matter of logic, everybody knows they're mortal, right? But really emotionally feeling it in your gut, knowing it, every second that you spend, you suddenly ask yourself, am I using my time wisely? What are my priorities? What's on my bucket list? It becomes a front and center kind of feeling. And once that went into my brain and heart, then I think mentorship took on a whole different perspective. So, first of all, mentorship is a tool for succession planning, right? And if you care about your field, if you want to see it continue and thrive and grow and head in the right direction, well, obviously your direction's the right direction, right? So you want to make sure that people who survive you, come after you, have at least your perspective. And I actually did the keynote speech for CAPED this year, in which I had essentially 75 minutes to tell people, here's what I want you to know about your field in a historical sense. What were the civil rights roots that came out of disability rights? Who had to sacrifice for us to get here? How do we tie into the greater American civil rights history? What happened at the 504 sit-in, which I was lucky enough to be present at? All of those things. And then I think also see it as an investment. I will say that for a while, I was a mentor to Jamie Axelrod. For a while, I was a mentor to Mary Lee Vance. There was a time when I helped Jamie to dissect court decisions. I helped Jamie to know how to do legal research. I modeled for Jamie how to teach the law. Now Jamie is highlighting cases for me. I might call Jamie and say, did you get blah blah blah? And Jamie, who has such a fine legal mind, he and I may debate back and forth, what a case does mean. But what a wonderful opportunity it is for both of us. So I think mentoring is most definitely, in its best sense, a two-way street, right? You might have to, make a down payment, but ultimately the investment is going to pay off. And finally, at my age, I think it's also an enduring connection device. So at some point, I'm going to spend more time on sailing and photography than I am on following the law. It would break my heart to think that I'm not going to have any enduring connection to the AHEAD learning community, right? And if I have mentees still in the AHEAD learning community, I can still call upon them. I can still reconnect with them. And I think that's really important.
I agree with you so much, Paul, because exactly what I was talking about when I said once Lisa and Michelle were with me, I didn't want to let go for that reason. You don't want the people that you create a connection with to just be a one-hit wonder. You want them to keep being wonderful, but being with you too. I think the hardest thing, and Janie, Jan, Paul, you may understand this more than Lisa and Michelle, who are still working in full-time roles at a university. I don't miss working at a university full-time. I miss the people and the connections. It's that piece. And that's what I love about what I do now, because I get to keep those connections. I wanted to briefly mention, as we were talking about mentoring models that were either same age or similar age, I think what gave me this idea from student affairs in general as a field, when I started out in the late 70s and early 80s at the University of Rhode Island, I worked with this absolutely wonderful woman, Fran Danowski Cohen, who was the director of the Women's Center and then became the Dean of Students at URI. Fran and I were in a master's program together, and she was finishing a thesis, and I had been encouraged by our then dean, Rod Crafts, to start publishing. He felt it very important for any of his staff to publish, which I appreciate to this day, because I think had I started my career somewhere else, I would have been said, I don't want to do research. I don't want to be a faculty member. I don't want to write. But Rod really encouraged that. And so Fran and I started this group. I think initially there were 4 of us, 3 really continued. And Fran was a bit older than me, but still was a colleague. And we met once a month with 2 young faculty members. And we published an article about how we'd had so many articles published, so many degrees conferred, and 1 baby amongst us. And it really taught me a lot about working with other women and how we need to build each other up, because I see way too many groups of women knocking each other down. And it was so important in my young career development. And I thank Fran Danowski Cohen for that, because she really taught me how to do that with other women. And it's been so important in my growth as a professional.
So interesting because there's so many themes coming out. You're talking about thought partners, like developing mentoring relationships, but it's an opportunity for you to check yourself. I would say Michelle, Neera Jane, Jan, in my biggest period as a DRP in health sciences, I would consistently check myself by being able to have these conversations with near peer mentors. And one of the things that was so interesting to me as I was reflecting on this episode and what you've all meant to me, Jane, was I was always astounded by how much you celebrated me and Michelle. You celebrated our wins. And to your point about women lifting women,
I
like
still do, you guys.
you do. And it felt so good to have somebody not competing with you. But then back to what Jane Jarrow said, this is the least territorial space that there is. And I know for my mentees, I now get it, Jane. Like when they do something or they achieve something, even from being able to have that conversation and use that medical school language and own their space when they're talking to a dean or an administrator, that is a point of celebration, to achieving awards, publishing their first papers, doing their first national presentations. Those are the things that I count among my biggest accomplishments, is seeing their accomplishments, like seeing them actualized into the person, the leader, the DRP that they're going to be. And I think that goes back to what Michelle said, is that no one is trying to build someone in their image. Everyone is trying to lift people up to be whatever the best version of their life, their profession, their leadership, whatever that is, that's the goal. That is critically important. And thank you for bringing up the Women for Women meaningful mentorship and friendship, because I know I've traditionally never had to worry about the kind of the cattiness. I've always surrounded myself with women who are just incredible mentors, incredible friends. And that's powerful. There's power in that. Jan, you are one of my best friends. We started out as colleagues. I certainly count you among my mentors, and as I said, one of my best friends. I learned so much. We're very different in the way we navigate the work, and it's been so important to me because I learn by watching you. I learn by just observing how you live your life, and how you engage in professional relationships. You are very grounded. And I would say the same about everyone here. Considerate of others, warm, inviting. You've mentored a fair share of health professionals. Do you think we can teach mentorship to others?
I don't think you can teach it. I think it evolves from actions, not necessarily words. I think your life actions demonstrate what mentorship is, and if somebody receives that, they can pass it on. I've just seen that those that I have invested in have invested in others.
Sitting here listening to all of you talk and thinking about your experiences versus mine, I am realizing that I have had a very different role over the course of my career and have been a different kind of mentor than you have, because I've been working by myself out of my dining room for the last almost 30 years now. And that means that the experience you've had, Jane, you said you don't miss the university structure and all of that. Jan, you talked about all of the people that you've watched and helped make look. I never worked with anybody else. I've been on my own. I've been working out of my dining room for all this time. And for me, it always surprises me when people talk about my being their mentor, because if I was a mentor to them, it was only because they came to me and asked a question. And if I was able to provide, then I was more than happy to do so. All too often, I never saw the results of what happened. The last time I was someplace where Lisa was, or where I guess it was a head conference a couple of years back, and I was talking to somebody and I said, I was there at the beginning with her. She's a force of nature at this point in time. She absolutely blows me away with her energy and her enthusiasm and with everything she's done. And I like thinking that I had some part in that in terms of getting you started. But I've always been, if I've been a mentor, it's been simply by virtue of doing what I think is right and leading by example, and not because I set out to do that, because I'm not in a position to directly mentor people in the way that you have been before.
Well, I think that goes back to what Jan was saying, that and what I feel, and that's the authenticity from all of you to invest in somebody. And so, let's take it out of that mentorship label and let's say you're investing in another person, right? You're giving of your time to that person. And Jane, I would argue with you. I know we've had this argument before. You gave me my confidence to be able to navigate the work. Without that, without your training, without your counsel, before we started recording, I was telling a story about how I got incensed, which anybody that knows me well knows that I'm very principled and I get incensed at people's actions. And I remember calling you and just this calmness and this, the way that you helped me go through it allowed me to become a leader eventually and to be able to manage how I navigated this work. You gave me that confidence. There is also another theme here of not doing it for somebody, right? Helping them understand the process and helping them think about the thought process. As I said, a thought partner. Jane, when I think about all the things that you did, a lot of it was the sponsorship and the friendship and just caring about me. From both of you, from all of you, really, I feel like you care about me as a person. And so again, maybe it's outside of that mentorship label, and instead it's investing in another person. And I think to Paul's point, I think that succession planning is critically important. And it is building the next generation of DRPs. And that is part of what Paul was talking about, feeling his vulnerability as a human on this earth. We're all there. Like, I know I'm there. I know that I think about, what is my investment? What is my contribution to this profession? What do I leave behind? We just announced our co-director of the Docs with Disabilities initiative. And in our board meetings talking about, I won't be here forever. We need multiple leaders. We need co-leadership. We need groups working together so that infrastructure isn't so easily dismantled, so that things can survive.
Lisa, isn't that a lot of really what mentoring is? I mean, again, I'm looking for a different word, but I know when in higher ed, when we first started talking about college students with autism, the idea was, come, join us. We need more people talking about this. There's a lot of students out there. How are we going? And it was really our passion about the students that were, come to this talk, go talk to this student panel, go listen, go learn, and then bring that back to your campus. I think a lot of it comes from our passion about the students. I think a lot of it comes from it, and Janie, this goes back to a lot of history with AHEAD and OSPE, but we went through that originally with the civil rights movement and getting people onto campus and into buildings and building elevators. And then with students with learning disabilities, as Paul was talking about, that, students, I still remember the day that a dean of nursing came into my office and said, "Let me make myself very clear. There will never be a nurse with a learning disability. Never." And look where we are now.
Yeah.
That was 1980. I remember the date. I remember the student, and still have her graduation picture hanging in my office. We went through this with different disability categories. And when autism came along, it wasn't a matter of, gee, do I have time to talk to these folks? It was the only way to get students to be successful on campus is to talk to DRPs, to get people. And Michelle can speak to this. That's how Mosaic grew. You can't do this work without mentoring people.
I love the idea of the thought partners, because I also think that it's an important concept that when you're mentoring somebody or sponsoring somebody, you don't solve for them. And that's one of the things that makes probably most of the people the most angry is that I don't give them the answer. I'm like, I don't know. What do you think about it? And Jane, you did that for me as well. And guiding the conversation, guiding the decision making, guiding the thought process. In this field, we're solvers. And so it takes everything in my being to not solve for somebody, but to guide that conversation.
I'm a big believer in handing people the tools. And what's interesting to me in our evaluations is people who like to be handed the tools like our classes a lot more than people who come and want answers, just
Yep.
simply want the answer. It's a different approach. I agree that this is a very emotional thing, right? It does come from the heart. It does come from the life experiences. And I think one way in which I was really, really lucky in my career is that I was kind of the Forrest Gump of the American civil rights history. The single most important case of my life was Lau v. Nichols, which was argued in the Supreme Court, and it was about language minority children and what their rights were. And it set a precedent that sometimes identical treatment is not equal treatment. And think about how that moved into disability rights, because students with disabilities do not always want to be treated identically. And that fundamental change in the definition of equality is a big part of our history. And so now when I get to my age and I'm thinking about mentoring, I'm thinking about it as part of that big historical picture, right? It really makes a difference if you feel in your heart that you're part of history, and where that history is going to go after you're gone, maybe you can have some influence on, right? And I think that's very important.
I love how you're situating the work on the shoulders of those who came before us and did this work. And I think that's one other critical part of mentorship is that, we invest so much in people, and it is important to honor the people who help you get where you go eventually, right? That was something that it's something that's very important to me, and continuously trying to thank the people who either lifted me up or had some impact on my career. That's something that's important because it also keeps you humble. It also keeps you in a state of gratitude, which is a good place to be for your well-being.
How can we foster the next generation of DRPs? There's no clear pathway to the profession, and everyone enters with different skills and varied gaps in knowledge. They are also entering the profession during one of the most complex times in history. So, I asked our panelists, how do we prepare them? How do we mentor them?
I think I would start with saying, and this is something that I've worked through as a professional over the last few years, it's okay to be emotional about our work, but we can't be defined by our work. So it's important to kind of compartmentalize. So even though our work is really hard, even though the stories that we hear are really hard, even though the students that are struggling really hard, that's not who we are as persons, right? So we can separate and still do the work really well.
So teaching them to maintain some healthy boundaries and some work-life balance. I think that it can become all-consuming. And so as part of professional development, helping people understand where those lines are.
I'm thinking about something that Jane said earlier about the number of people on the AHEAD listserv who post anonymously. It worries me. It worries me for the reasons that you stated, Jane, because I think that all too often it's because they are self-conscious about revealing themselves as needing to ask the question. And I think in terms of setting up the next generation of DSPs, the answer is they need to understand not what to do, but why they're doing it. And I'm not sure we've done a really good job of figuring out how to pass along that knowledge. And I think part of that is because there's a feeling of urgency, but I need to know what to do now, today, with the student who's sitting in front of me. And while I understand that, they need to understand the importance of the background, the legal, not just the legal, but the practical implications of what they're doing. And I think that we lead by example. There was a point in time where I said I wasn't going to answer any anonymous posts to the AHEAD listserv. I have come to the point where I will answer anonymous posts, but I regularly end those anonymous posts by saying, if you'd like to contact me off list, I would be happy to walk you through this. And I would say 9 times out of 10, I will then later in the day get an email from that person saying, can you help me with this? And maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe the answer is to say, we respect the fact that you're not feeling confident. We can help, just reach out. And that's the way to mentor people through, is to tell them it's okay to ask and I'm here.
I think one of the strongest drivers in all of life, in all of human existence, is the need to have a sense of mission and a sense of importance. And I think in our field, many people are working at institutions where the people above them are not giving them a sense of mission, are not giving them a sense of importance. To the contrary, they're belittling them, they're marginalizing them. And here you are doing frustrating, difficult, time intensive work, and you don't have that. And I think for me, the most valuable thing I can do is try to give people a sense of mission and importance.
I agree with a lot of what's said. I think what's going to help with the next generation of DRPs is a number of things. The number of self-advocates we have coming up in all of the different disability groups is going to help us all tremendously, because we need to hear from people's own voices. I think the other piece that helps us a lot is technology. We're all able to connect in a way like this, where years ago, you were lucky if you could make a conference call with a few people, and then it was going to conferences, which not everybody could afford to do. And now we can have Zoom meetings like this. And I have so appreciated all the comments from all of you amazing people. And I want to thank Lisa for getting us together. When do we have the opportunity to even think about this and even think about that succession planning, that mentoring? What stuck with me over the years, and it was something that I learned from a mentor, that was when I was joining a really important group of people that was sort of like a board, but it was more a committee for an institution. And as I was coming in, and they knew not only my background with disability services or as a DRP, but also as a parent of a severely disabled individual, And as I was going in to join this board, this committee, I'd been asked to represent the university on. The person who led the group stopped me outside and said, "Before you go in, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. And I want to remind you to please bring your passion, but check your emotion at the door."
Mm.
And that stuck with me for the rest of my life, not just my career. That sometimes we really need to bring our passion about students, but we need to check our emotion, because it's not the personal emotional part, though we're all passionate about what we do. But our passion has to show in our work, and that's how we really mentor people and how we build others to mentor the field.
I think it takes the ability to keep people centered on what the work is, especially since we come from so many different backgrounds, like counseling to educational psychology, school psychology, special education, like all of these different backgrounds, keeping us focused on what the work is. It sounds like keeping boundaries, making sure that you're paying it forward, making sure that you have the amazing and authentic advocacy, but where it's not being overrun with emotion. And Jan, what would you add to that?
Well, I think one of the most challenging things is getting the right people hired in these positions. And so just getting the right people and getting those people and investing in those people is just really important. And I think one of the new other challenges will be more and more DRPs working remotely. And how will you mentor that person? So there's new things to be thinking about.
There's one person missing from our discussion today, and that's Susan Sampson, who was my boss at Case Western Reserve, and unfortunately she passed away this year. Part of what drove me to do this episode, and part of why I wanted to do this episode, was to make sure that nothing happened where I couldn't tell you how much you mean to me. I wanted to make sure that I could tell you and make sure that you knew how much you mean to me. And I encourage everyone listening to reach out to their mentor. It's National Mentoring Month, and to let that person know what they've meant to your life and to your career. I've been very blessed to have many of my mentors turn into personal friends and lifelong relationships. Michelle and I became grandparents together. Collectively, we've been through marriage, grandparents, babies, adoptions, cancer. We've been through life, and we've all held each other up, both in the workplace and in the personal sphere. And so I'm blessed. I hope that the listeners have people around them that can give them the same level of support, sponsorship, and mentorship. And if you don't, the lesson that I hope you take away from today is to find someone and reach out, because people in this profession, in one of the kindest professions that there is, are more than willing to answer that email, more than willing to answer that call, and want to contribute to your development. So thank you all so much for joining me. I knew you would be amazing, and you were exactly what I believed you would be.
As we wrap up this episode, it's clear that mentorship in the field of disability resources is not just about imparting knowledge or guiding careers. It's about building a community, fostering connections, and creating a supportive environment where everyone, regardless of their role or experience, can thrive and contribute to the collective success. Thank you for joining us for this special series on DRPs and through this journey of mentorship. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the dynamic world of disability resource professionals focused on leadership and building the next generation of DRP leaders. This podcast is a production of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative and is supported, in part, by the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Family Medicine M-Disability Initiative, the Stanford Medicine Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity, and the Ford Foundation. The opinions on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of their hosts, the respective institutions, or the funders. This podcast is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative License. This episode was produced by Lisa Meeks and Jacob Feeman.